Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is Betsy from the Greetery, and we have kicked off our countdown to the release of our first ever holiday collection called Let's Make Memories. And one of the sets being featured on the blog today is called Christmas Eve, and it features this really pretty multi-step church along with a tree, a multi-step tree, these adorable little cars, and some banners, and then also a precious little family of silhouettes that are headed into the Christmas Eve service. And so I wanted to do a little introductory video on this set today, and I especially wanted to show you a couple of different things. And one was how to stamp the multi-step church. So we're going to stamp that out, and which is really pretty simple. It goes together pretty easily. Of course, there's a stamping guide, and those steps are labeled, and they are also labeled on the actual sheet of stamps. So it's pretty easy to pick out those steps. And then I also want to show you one of the dies that's included in the matching die set. And this is going to allow you to cut out the windows of the church. So we're going to make a one-layer card today. And I haven't put this together prior to this video. It's just something I had in my mind that I wanted to work out, and so we'll see how it goes. So let's get started. So I'm going to be using my MISTI to stamp the various steps of this church. I'm going to start with the first step, which is this one right here. And I have a piece of scrap cardstock in my MISTI right now, and it's the same size as my card. So it's an A2 size of cardstock. And I'm going to position this church right where I want it to be on my finished project, which is right there. And what I'm going to do, since I want to stamp this church in shades of gray, like a pale gray, for the first and second steps of the actual building itself, which can be kind of hard to see from layer to layer for lining things up. So one thing that I like to do is I like to stamp it first in black, and that's why I have my scrap cardstock in here. So I have that positioned there where I want it. I'm going to clean off my stamp so I can do a light gray for the next step. Okay, so I'm going to take out my scrap of cardstock and switch that for my actual card base I have here, and I'm going to use a little washi to secure that down so it doesn't flop up on me. And I'm going to be using a pale gray. This is Sea Salt from Tailored Expressions. It's a really pale gray, so we're probably going to have to stamp that a couple of times. Okay, and so then you can probably see what I mean about this being really light. And so my next layer, if I were to try to line it up with this pale gray, would be a little bit tricky. And so we're going to switch back to our nice dark black image here, and we're going to take step 2, which is this one right here. It's kind of a shadow for under the roof and a shadow for the side of the building. And you can see here how that will make it nice and easy to line that up. Okay, so I'll close up my lid. And I don't actually need to stamp it this time on our scrap. I can go ahead and just switch out and put my actual card base back in there and stamp that second layer. I'm going to be using Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide for this next step. And instead of inking it directly to the stamp from the pad, I like to use these little finger sponges. I almost always do this with the oxide inks because otherwise they're a little bit blotchy or a little too heavy. Okay, now you can see how that was nicely lined up there. Now we can go ahead and do our roof, which is step 3. And I think I'm going to switch back to my scrap image again, my nice black image, just because that's a little bit easier to line up. Okay, so once again, close that lid. And if you want to check it to make sure it's lined up before you stamp it onto your project, you can definitely do that. I'm going to stamp the roof in a red. This is Candied Apple Distress Oxide. And I will just double check it to make sure it's nicely lined up how I want it, and that's looking good. So I can go ahead and stamp that right onto my card base. I want it a little darker, so I'm going to stamp it again. Sometimes I do direct pad to stamp inking, but then I always go back over with my little finger sponge to kind of smooth that out and maybe take away some of that excess ink, because those oxides are just really, really juicy. All right, so that's really coming together and looking really pretty. So now we're going to do the next step, which is the windows. Put my little guide back in here again so I can get this really nicely positioned where it needs to be. Go ahead and close my lid. Now for these windows, I want to make them look like they're glowing. Like there's light coming from the windows. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some yellow and a little bit of orange to kind of shade that. And you could, once again, like I said, you can double check to make sure things are lined up before you stamp on your final project. But we're going to go for it. We're gonna just assume that we are good to go today. So I'm going to sponge this, first of all, with this bright yellow. This is mustard seed ink. And I'll go ahead and stamp that. And then I want to add just a little bit of shading to that. And so I'm going to take Rusty Hinge and once again a little finger sponge. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sponge that orange to the bottom of the windows to give kind of a gradient effect. And you can see how that just really lit that up and made that come to life. So there's one more step to the church, and it is a little bit of definition for the windows. And you can, this step is kind of optional. You can do it or you can leave it off. I've kind of found that when I want to cut out the windows, like we're going to do here in just a minute, I like to just omit this step. So we're going to leave that off for now, but what it does is it just gives a little bit of a shadow or a definition to the windows. It kind of just, one of those little details that just kind of brings it to life. But we're going to leave it off because I want to die cut these windows. So this little die from the set will allow you to cut just this main window. So it's sized a little bit smaller than the actual church image itself, so that you can position that right in place and you can get a nice cut. So you can see here I have just a little bit of the roof line showing, so that die is nice and centered in there. And then that should give you good results. I'm going to tape that in place and I'll go run that through my die cut machine. All right, so I'm back and let's take this off and let's see if I was successful in lining that up. And I was. It's absolutely perfect. So we can go ahead and punch out those little windows. And so now we just have kind of this little peekaboo card front, which is kind of fun. So let's go ahead and finish off this card. I was thinking I would like to sponge a little bit of sky and make it look like there's snowdrifts. And so I pulled out, this is actually the little punch out piece from our pathway stencil. And so I am going to use that to sponge what looks like maybe some snowy hills or like a sky. And so I'm going to use tumbled glass. And then maybe we'll flip that around. Like I said, I haven't done this card, and so it's just something I had in my mind. We'll see how it turns out. Maybe we'll flip it around and do kind of another layer of snowdrifts this way. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I think we're going to finish it off with a couple of trees around there. Just real simple. So I'm going to put this back in my MISTI. And we'll go ahead and stamp a couple of the trees. So I'll start off with the base layer, just the more solid layer, step 1 of the tree. And I am going to use bundled sage. And I like to stamp it a couple times, and again I just use the sponging method. And then I'm going to add the second step of the tree. And I'm going to stamp that using evergreen bough. Alright, so our card is about finished. I feel like it needs something up in the sky, so I think I'm going to go ahead and add some stenciling using our new Frosty Flakes stencils. So I'm going to go ahead and use the all over snowy pattern, and I'm just going to use my tumbled glass ink to sponge over that. So I want to add a few more details, so I'm going to add a sentiment from the Christmas Eve set, and I'm also going to stamp these banners across the top. And since we have this fun little peekaboo window in the front of our card, I feel like we need to finish off the inside as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sponge a little bit of yellow ink that can shine through that window. And then I'm also going to add a sentiment from the new Sentiment Suite set that we have coming out. You'll see more of this later this week. But I want to make sure that I stamp that in the right spot so it doesn't show through the window. So I'm either going to move it way up, which I think I'll do, otherwise it's too low. And this is a great little sentiment for this card. It says, "May the spirit of Christmas fill your heart and home, hoping this blessed season brings joy and peace to you and yours." So I think that's a great sentiment to put inside this card with this pretty church in the snowy hills. So we'll stamp that right there, and then when we close it, we have our little bit of glowing windows showing through the inside as well. So that wraps up this introductory video to the Christmas Eve set. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy all the rest of our countdown festivities that happen this week. All of these new products will go up in the shop at thegreetery.com on Friday morning, October 4 at 10 a.m. Eastern Time.